There was an article posted on December 26 of 2023, which read this, quote, Penn State's Kalen King, a potential first-round pick, is poised to play in the Peach Bowl. That article was published a little over 5 months ago, and as we flash forward to the 2024 NFL Draft, Kalen King did not end up living up to that. Not only was he not a first-round pick, but he wasn't a second, third, fourth, fifth, or even sixth-round pick. Penn State's Kalen King would be taken with the 255th overall pick in the 7th round by the Green Bay Packers. There's a lot of times where people say a player could be a steal or could be an absolute gem, but if there is one example in which that could actually be applied, I think it's this. ESPN issued an article saying, quote, why Packers' Kalen King may be the biggest steal of the draft. There's also another way that you could phrase it, and you could say he had the biggest stock crash of anybody. In today's video, we're going to take a look at that. How did Kalen King go from a first-round pick just 6 months ago to a guy who fell all the way to the 7th round? Well, we'll have to figure that one out, go through how he became a big 4-star recruit to begin with, and talk about his college career and everything that happened. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about what happened to Kalen King. So in order to understand why Kalen King's draft stock crashed, we first need to go back in time. He was born in Detroit, Michigan in 2003 and had a twin brother by the name of Kobe. Detroit was always a huge football place, and even with the Lions not doing so well at the time, both grew up huge football fans. They had been playing on the same team since they were very young, from Pee Wee football all the way through high school. Their father Tadero would take them to a ton of football games in the area, in which they watched a lot of big-time names. He grew up watching players such as Donovan Peoples-Jones, Vernon Gholston, and even Lano Hill. They all went to the same high school, Cass Tech. If you're not familiar with high school football, they're one of the best in the state of Michigan, and pretty much they are nationally known. He enjoyed watching them so much that he decided he would go there for his high school career. Like so many other players in the Detroit area, he played other sports than football. He was a 3-sport star for Cass Tech, lettering in basketball and track, and was also a public school all-selection for every single sport he played in. But football was always going to be his favorite, and it was the one that made the most sense for him. His head coach Thomas Wilcher said, quote, at the end of the day, he uses track and basketball to get in shape for football. He knows the best way to get faster is to run and compete at a high level, so he supplements his skills year-round, and I think that's really helped him become the football player he is today. Kalen and Kobe were both running backs on offense, and were kind of known as Thunder and Lightning for Cass Tech. First on JV their freshman year, then on varsity the rest of the time they spent in high school. But on defense, they ended up playing different positions. Kobe would play linebacker, while Kalen, using his great speed and agility, played defensive back. They were solid players their freshman year in 2017, but that wasn't on the varsity squad. Cass Tech would go 11-2 in 2018, finishing 4-0 in the league, and Kalen was a huge part of that. I wasn't actually able to find many of his high school game stats online, but I did find a few. He forced 2 fumbles, intercepted a pass, and broke up 7 passes, and Kalen specifically was always a huge playmaker. His efforts off the field were also well known. His coach said, quote, he's one of the hardest working kids in our program, and he plays a variety of positions for us from defensive back to wide receiver to punt returner. He always wants to do whatever it takes to help us win, and that's really a coach's dream to have someone that talented and also be one of the hardest workers in the room. In between Kalen's sophomore and junior year, he was invited to the Nike Combine, where he recorded a 34.4-inch vertical jump and a 3.95 second in the shuttle drill. This was pretty impressive for someone his age and was only really known locally in the Detroit area. His recruiting would absolutely blow up after this, as Iowa was the first Power 5 school to offer him, but no other teams really followed afterwards. Kalen would get his second Power 5 offer from Indiana in December, and as basketball season went on, he got offers from Michigan, Kentucky, Penn State, UAB, and Nebraska. He always really liked Penn State, enough for him to take an unofficial visit before the start of his junior year. It wouldn't be till after his junior year, though, that scouts from other schools really started to take notice. 2019 was a tough year for Cass Tech, as they only went 7-6 and 2-2 in their league, but they did make the Michigan Division I state quarterfinals. Kalen and Kobe's role started to open up on offense and defense, and scouts really started to take notice of both of them. Kalen had 25 tackles, 4 pass breakups, and an interception as a junior to go alongside 14 touchdown catches. After that, Purdue, Rutgers, Pitt, Syracuse, and Michigan State all offered him, and before long, the entire Big Ten had pretty much offered him a scholarship in 2020. In April of 2020, with over 30 offers, both Kalen and Kobe sat down to announce their commitments, where it would end up happening, and both committed to Penn State. They both chose Penn State, even though Kobe was leaning towards Wisconsin, because the path of playing time was a little easier for both of them there. Kalen said, quote, We both know they play a lot of freshmen early, which is also a reason why we considered them for commitment. They liked both of us and told us that we were both priorities, not just one of us. While they're both going to Penn State, the fact that the school wanted them wasn't their main driver in why they went there. Kalen said, quote, "It's been fun, and we've always been on the same team our whole lives, and being able to be recruited at the same amazing colleges and get an opportunity to continue our dream is definitely a dream come true, and something we couldn't pass up. But of course, considering everything that went on in the world in 2020, it didn't go as planned, and things had to be a little bit different both on and off the field. As he prepped for his senior year, he would end up spending time in the family's garage, lifting weights with his brother. Cass Tech had a really good year once again in 2020, as they went 12-2 and lost in the 4th round of the high school playoffs. Kalen was a huge part of those offenses and defenses, and Penn State was incredibly interested in adding him. As a senior, he caught 3 interceptions and deflected 5 passes, as well as scoring 8 touchdowns on defense. By the time he had ended up leaving Cass Tech, he was a pretty big deal. According to 24/7 Sports, King was a 4-star player, the number 16 corner, and the 222nd best player in the class of 2021. He ended up deciding to graduate and enroll early, and now he'd be hyped up at Penn State. His brother wouldn't get as much hype, but how did they end up doing at Penn State? Well, let's take a look. So when King arrived at Penn State, he would immediately impress head coach James Franklin and the rest of the Nittany Lions coaching staff. This was back in 2021, and Franklin said, quote, "He's probably the most advanced freshman that we've had since we've been here." That's pretty high praise for a guy like that. He was a star in spring practice for the Nittany Lions, and at the first open spring practice media day, there were some pundits thinking he would be the greatest defensive back in school history. I mean, it was all hype at this point, and everyone was super excited to see what King would do. At the time, he had 2 interceptions of both Taquan Roberson and Sean Clifford, and he was getting a ton of hype. He already entered a cornerback room that would already include Joey Porter Jr., Tariq Castro-Fields, Johnny Dixon, and Marquise Wilson, so having him explode into the scene was a pretty huge surprise. I mean, they were absolutely loaded. At the time, his defensive coordinator Brent Pry said, quote, "It just really comes easy to Kalen. He's shown that since practice 1. I don't think there's been a practice go by where we haven't seen highlights from him. He's also still learning the position." Given how deep the corner room was in 2021, it wasn't a surprise that Kalen wasn't really on the field that much. But when he did, he made the most of his appearances. He ended up finishing with 21 tackles, 1 TFL, 5 pass breakups, and 1 forced fumble in 13 games. Penn State kind of struggled on the year, as in 2021 they ended up going 7-6, and compared to their usual standard, this was actually pretty bad. They would end up also losing to Arkansas in the Outback Bowl. In 2022, they would need to revitalize. Part of what they did was bring in former Miami head coach Manny Diaz. He became the team's defensive coordinator, which meant another shift in the defensive system they were playing in. But it also meant that Kalen would be getting a lot more time, since now both Tariq Castro-Fields and Jordan Brisker were drafted into the NFL. Coach Diaz really liked Kalen as a quarterback and said, quote, "He has a great mentality for playing man coverage and obviously great skills on the ball. It makes him hard to complete passes against that guy." King was named a starter before the season began and found himself as Penn State's number 2 corner on the roster besides Joey Porter Jr. There was a ton of hype for Kalen going into his sophomore year, and he was going to get it right. He ended up finishing with 30 tackles, 18 pass breakups, a fumble, and 3 interceptions in 13 games. Quarterbacks also had a rating under 60 when they targeted him. His performance was good enough for him to be a 3rd-team All-Big Ten selection, and Penn State would improve to an 11-2 record on the year. They ended up beating Utah in the Rose Bowl, and Kalen King was a huge name. His hype was absolutely through the roof, and it was pretty clear he'd be one of the best defensive back prospects in the 2024 draft class. Most scouts projected him to be a 1st-round pick, and that was the narrative all summer long. But then the wheels came off his junior year in 2023. While Penn State did go 10-3 with a loss in the Peach Bowl to Ole Miss, Kalen reverted to how he was as a freshman. In 12 games at the Lions, he finished with 29 tackles, 1.5 TFLs, and no interceptions, with literally only 2 pass deflections. He ended up being a 2nd-team All-Big Ten selection, but many believe that was mostly because of the season prior. Teams ran receivers directly into him, forcing him into press coverage, where he immensely struggled. He drew 4 holding penalties over the course of the year, and he got much worse in pass defense from his sophomore to his junior year. He went from a guy who was supposed to be a 1st-round pick to then some believing he may not get drafted at all. That article published last year talked about how King could go as high as number 17 overall, but then with the season and the combine combined, King absolutely fell apart. Despite having that bad year, he decided to declare for the draft anyway, because he'd probably end up being a 2nd or 3rd round pick. The first thing he did was go and play in the Senior Bowl, where he struggled immensely. Secondly, he went to the combine and measured poorly. He ran a 4.6 at the 40-yard dash and just looked like he was a step slow and behind. He pretty much fell off draft boards entirely, and the only thing that was really good about him were his shuttle times and his numbers in 2022. Despite that though, the Green Bay Packers still decided to take a flyer on him. They ended up taking him the 255th overall pick in the 7th round, and he's the definition of your late round flyer. If he's as bad as he was recently, there's a chance he doesn't even make the roster, but if he gets back to his early Penn State days, it could be an absolute steal, and everyone will be calling him a genius. Right now, he'll be sitting behind Corey Ballantyne and Robert Mitchell on the depth chart, so there really isn't much of a route for him to find a lot of playing time. That's of course unless he gets bigger and faster, which is a possibility. Honestly, there's a chance that Kalen elevates his game, because seemingly he plays his best football when he's underrated and not the main dude. We'll definitely have to see what happens, but it's very unfortunate for Kalen King. I remember him being all over first round draft boards this time last year, and it's unfortunate that he was not able to live up to the hype. I do hope the best for him in Green Bay, and I'm definitely curious to see what's going to happen. But what do you guys think? If you're a Penn State or a Packers fan, why did Kalen King have such a poor season? And who's another player who I could take a look at next whose draft stock absolutely crashed? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.